I'm hoping you can hear me. Yes, okay, mic is working. Good to see everyone, and I'm honored to be here, and it's so great to be with such a distinguished panel of experts. I want to say that this is a very special moment in Los Angeles. As you all know, we are facing a humanitarian crisis when it comes to homelessness. Mayor Bass, on her first day in office, called a state of emergency, and as you just heard, the county supervisors agreed and also called a state of emergency. So the amount of alignment and agreement that we must do something about the state of our streets and what this means to Black Los Angeles is very clear. The drivers of homelessness are also clear, and we want to talk about those today. There's an inadequate amount of housing, as you all know. And we also know that housing is too costly and rents are too high. But we also want to call out systemic racism as a driver of homelessness. As you heard earlier, here in Los Angeles, Black people make up 8% of the general population and 30% of those who are houseless. This is true across our country. In most of the states, we see this type of overrepresentation of Black people. So today's panel is going to discuss the intersectionality of housing and homelessness. You really can't talk about one without discussing the other. Homelessness is a symptom of the housing affordability crisis. A household, as you heard, is considered severely rent burdened when they spend more than 50% of their income on rent and utilities. They're considered cost burdened when they spend 30% of their income on those expenses. Ms. Mills, I want to start with you. You spent a large part of your career building affordable housing, and we salute you for that. And coming from your work as a developer, can you please share with us the challenges that you've faced building affordable housing in Black and brown communities and the successes that you've also seen in that work?
Well, let me start with the success. I do believe now that affordable housing is usually the best maintained, the best looking on the block. I do, on the opposite end, feel that one of the challenges that I find is that we tend to congregate around a single identity, and that identity now is homelessness and permanent supportive housing. We do a great deal and raise a lot of money and push a lot of legislation to taking care of those who are homeless. But our housing works after you fall off the cliff. Mm-hmm. Where at my organization, my interest, because I live and have been raised and grew up and raised my family in the Crenshaw district, I'm concerned about us placing that kind of concentration of poverty along those corridors, because what we're doing is through legislation inadvertently moving the middle class out. We're not providing that step up. And what I would like to see more concentration is a mixed income model, one that allows people to move into housing, to reset, to launch, and not to wait for them to fall off that cliff.
Yes. We really do need to raise up prevention, and I could hear the audience going, yes, please let's start talking about the cliff. Let's start preventing people from falling into homelessness. And the UCSF Benioff study of homelessness and housing in California found that most people said that the reason they fell into homelessness was due to a loss of income or a reduction in their pay. Dr. Sean Crawford, thank you for being here. And I know you're a national expert. And we want you to share a little bit about how people fall into homelessness and what some of those triggers are in those experiences.
Right. So we say people, we're talking about Black people, right?
We're talking about Black people.
We're talking about Black people.
That's right.
So look, this is what I call the pile up of inequities, right? It's a pile up. So let's even start with deep poverty. Black people are more likely to live in deep poverty. Who knows what the deep poverty income is? Well, okay, I'll tell you. Oh, so somebody. It's about less than 8,000. Now, you know, if you in LA with less than 8,000, that's not enough dough for housing. And yes, I said dough. That's money for people who don't know. But I'm talking to black people, right? So I'm just coming at you with real language. You can't survive. Black people are 16 times more likely to be in third generational poverty. What does that mean? In areas and neighborhoods where there is not a lot of investment, the lack of opportunities, schools not so great. And what do we know about wealth, right? We know that wealth gives our children oftentimes that future, those educational opportunities, etc. Well, black people, white folks are like at least 9 times more likely to be more wealthier. I think black people maybe make about $15 per every $100 that a white person makes in terms of wealth. And so how do we get here? Because I don't like just throwing these numbers out, right, without putting it in context. There's a reason why we're here. Oh, and I hear my voice louder, but I hope you all heard me at the beginning. There's a reason, right? And so we know that housing is at the center oftentimes of wealth. But a lot of people don't realize is that racial discrimination in housing spearheaded by the government. So it's not just me up here talking, redlining that actually disinvested in neighborhoods and segregated neighborhoods. And we always say redlining, and I'm not sure if everybody knows what that means, but it's like taking a neighborhood, right? Not giving it the investment that it deserves and trying to squeeze the life out of it and segregating it and saying, oh, but we're going to keep you here because we're going to have all these types of covenants and you can't move to the wider neighborhoods where we have resources and opportunities where people can get good jobs. And today, still to this day, so many communities are segregated that way. So there's a reason, right? And then segregated means no investment, right? And so all of this is tied to like property taxes. That says a lot about what's invested into your schools. And so in so many ways, like I mentioned, that 16 times likely to be third generation of poverty, you're stuck there in so many ways, right? And so that's one driver. And then there's overcriminalization, surveillance of our neighborhoods, being arrested for and serving prison times and being sent to jail, more likely than white counterparts for some of the same offenses. You know, the lack of access to health care. So I'm summarizing everything in 3 minutes, but what I don't like to do is kind of give these statistics and not put them in context so that people understand, oh, there's a reason why we see this. Now it's up to us to figure out, now what do we do about it? Undoing what happened historically and what still happens. Yeah. But those are some of the drivers.
Thank you. And what I hear you saying is it was intentional.
Intentional.
It's not our fault. You know, as a person, I'm at LASA now, but I started as a provider.
That's right.
So my team connected with people in encampments.
That's right.
And the thing you got to get people to see is you didn't want this.
That's right.
And you still don't want this. And we have to talk about, you know, the work we're doing in encampments and how most people say yes. No matter what they tell you, whatever the media says, people don't want housing, people believe people want to be on the streets. Nobody wants to be on the streets. No one wants to be homeless. But part of the change is reminding them or telling them, you're not crazy. You did not do this. You didn't select this. And really, once people start getting better, we start to educate them on how intentional this was.
That's right.
And how when they didn't go to grandma's to mess her up and they chose the tent, that was honorable. They were trying to be honorable and not hurt their family members. So
that's right.
Thank you for that.
That's right.
Dr. Chinchilla, we've seen a rise in Black and Latino homelessness over the years. What challenges are we seeing among the Latino community that you've written so much about? And how are those things similar or different from what we're seeing in the Black community? And maybe reflect on that. And then we want you to touch a little bit on prevention. How can we start to think about prevention?
Thank you for that question. So yeah, unfortunately, we have seen an increased number of Latinos experiencing homelessness, both in Los Angeles County and also nationally. In Los Angeles County, I believe the estimates in the past 5-6 years has been a 75% increase over that time. So really alarming increase in terms of representation in some of our formal homeless count numbers. I think you all mentioned a lot of the factors that contribute to Black people experiencing homelessness, poverty, unaffordable housing. These are also factors that contribute to Latino homelessness as well. We see disproportionate representation in low working jobs. We see the population being disproportionately impacted by foster care and justice systems, which we know are feeders into homelessness. And so a lot of the factors that are impacting the Black community also impacting the Latino community. Other things that I'd say are perhaps more prominent, but are not, I want to say not specific to the Latino community, are experiences of doubling up, and so doubled up homelessness, loss of housing, and being forced to stay with family or friends in temporary living accommodations due to things like eviction and not being able to afford your rent. We did some work trying to estimate what this number looks like, because doubled up homelessness is a hidden number. So looking at census data, we estimate that about 6.2% of Latinos experience doubled up homelessness here in Los Angeles County. For Black Angelenos, that number is about 3.6%. So also something that we see within the Black community as well. And we can compare this to the experience of white Angelenos, where the number of doubled up homelessness is only about 1.3%, so not as prevalent. So doubled up homelessness, I think one of the things when we look at reports that have been done, for example, a California-wide report conducted by the Benioff Institute, we see that most people that fall into homelessness from a situation where they previously were not a leaseholder. So these are situations that are likely doubled up, where you don't have tenant rights, where you're likely living in substandard conditions. I've heard stories of 30 people living in a 3-bedroom apartment, of 12 people taking turns sleeping in a 1-bedroom apartment. And these numbers are not being captured in terms of how we're thinking about and scaling the issue of homelessness. So I think in terms of prevention, we need to start thinking about, well, what's the definition of, how are we defining service access for homeless services? How do we think about these households that are currently not street homeless, but are very much on the edge of experiencing street homelessness or having to enter a shelter? How do we prevent them from having to do so? So I do think that's one of the recommendations, one of the thoughts I have in terms of prevention. And then I can just speak really quickly to, the need to improve. We need to improve the way that our rehousing system works, which I know Dr. Adams-Kellen's been doing a lot of work, and we need to make it so that it's more flexible to meet individuals' needs. We need to make it so that it is, you are able to easily access resources. You know where to go to obtain resources. Oftentimes we see a lack of information in our communities. So I'll go ahead and stop there.
Well, thank you. I mean, one of the things we found when we did our work, and I happened to be the architect of Mayor Bass's Inside Safe, and I get to say that because she generously told the universe that I did that, so I could claim it, and all the faults that we find in it that we are improving. She always teaches me not to be afraid to talk about what needs to be improved in our work and to be very confident in it. But we found that who delivers the services is so important. Leaning on people with lived experience who get it and understand. I was just sitting here saying, oh, I use that. I said, well, you're not crazy. And I was like, oh, yeah, we're in a Black environment. Most of you understand what that means in our home. We say, well, you're not crazy. It means you're not tripping, right? It doesn't speak to mental health. You're not tripping. This was systemic. These things were intentional. And who serves the person often gets that.
Correct.
And you change people's hearts by helping them understand that they deserve better. So I just want to say that how we deliver and who we deliver and what language we deliver services and who leads those organizations and the extent to which we look like the people who are needing help all matters. So I want to turn to the Michaels, and I want to start with you, Mr. Anderson.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I just want to say that, some of what we're talking about connects to Black wealth, right? And it connects to economic development in communities. And one of your favorite words, infrastructure.
That's correct. Yeah.
So I want to give you the floor to talk a little bit about how we need to do better in Black and brown communities and what you recommend.
Sure. So to give you a little bit of background, I did a lot of studies for Metro on the TOD studies when they put a light rail line in. So I did the Crenshaw LAX line. And one of the things that bothered me is that we always finish these studies with no capitalization of how it's going to get implemented. So if you look at the housing and the infrastructure need of LA we know needs 800,000 units of housing. If somebody were going to write a check, that would be $600 billion. The infrastructure to support that would be $100 billion. So we have to look at how to make a deal at a large scale that capitalizes those activities. So we're not just doing an affordable housing project here and there. We're rebuilding the entire community. So if you look at how the federal government invested in building highways that took new cities and developments that happen in other territories, we looked at it reinvesting the Investment Infrastructure Jobs Act capital into the Black and brown community. President Biden passed Justice 40, which meant 40% of the $1.2 trillion gets prioritized for underserved communities. So I looked at that like, how do we make a deal possible that we can rebuild our communities around the transit stations? So I met with the Department of Transportation and proposed $1 billion infrastructure investment around each of the Metro transit stations along the Blue Line, the K Line, and the future Southeast Gateway Corridor. What that looks like is rebuilding entirely the existing wet and dry utilities, the water lines, the electrical lines, broadband to 100% above the existing capacity. The transportation fund pays for everything that's public, horizontally and vertical. What that means is you can rebuild all the streets, sidewalks, alleys, put in large 10-foot wide shaded trees, and you can rebuild, add a water recycling facility that recycles the water to reduce the need to import that. What that does is that instantly makes a safe 15-minute, half-mile walkable community around our transit stations. And what that does is that starts to make the quality of the passenger experience better. So Compton, Watts, Willowbrook all simultaneously become beautiful. They all look like downtown Culver City or someplace like that for a 15-minute walk. And the quality of life has an impact on a child's development. So when we do this as a modernization strategy, we actually, what I've designed is called accelerated housing and transit development. And what that does is you create a 10-year modernization of our communities in a way that you can employ young people in the community so that the community graduates out of poverty. Because if a kid starts working on a park that's in their neighborhood, like at Slauson and Miramonte or someplace by the Slauson station, they start to take ownership of what they've created. And so typically when you get federal funds, it takes 5 to 7 years to get it. So we looked at using private capital ahead of those federal funds so you could start doing the projects right away. You also could bypass the Prop 209 restrictions by doing it under a P3 strategy or something like that. So we have to come up with better thinking, and one of the things is when we shared this with the Department of Transportation, we had a global think tank do an economic analysis. They reviewed it. In April 2023, the department had $115 billion in unsubscribed funds. In August 23, we presented the strategy to them. She said the project is ready for review. It asked for $24 billion in LA County to receive infrastructure funding. The housing component we're now working on, which I'll talk about later, but that's really how you apply climate funds for black families to get equity. When people tell me you're going to give a black person equity, I'm like, that's cash. You know, don't tell me about a training program. They need cash, right? So we have to get smart about how the government has provided the money. And the last thing I'll say, when President Biden passed the 1.2 infrastructure funding and the $400 billion climate funding, I said, in the executive order, I said, this is our one shot to get the magnitude of money we need that really makes our communities self-sustaining and vibrant. And I'll stop right there for right now. Okay.
Mr. Banner, we want you to jump in and share your insights into how we can improve the lives of Black people, Black and brown people.
So I'm happy to be here, and I kudos to Michael for actually saying we've had a lot of studies. We have to do something now. And my background is I've spent a lot of years in real estate. I'm a longtime member of the Urban Land Institute and a former banker. And so I see some of my colleagues out here in the audience. And one of the things that I will tell you from my own experience, especially if you look at homelessness and housing, it's a complex problem. Requires a lot of different solutions. And I love the thing where you said you have to figure out how to customize, because when you make a box and everything has to fit in it, everything's not going to fit. And so we're kind of wrapped up in that in terms of trying to deliver the capital to change communities. The other thing that I think is important, that in my work around other cities around the country, Baltimore, Chicago, Philadelphia. I do a lot of these kinds of studies, and the one thing that usually happens is like the implementation of this, how do we go from point A to point B, is kind of fuzzy. And y'all figure it out. I think today, with the kind of political environment that I see it, that if you have, my concept is what I call HEAT, housing, education, economic development, and transportations. Those are 4 key elements of changing, in my work, commercial corridors. Mm-hmm. And LA is full of commercial corridors. Rochelle talked earlier about we're now starting to aggregate housing in these commercial corridors where the 30 or 40 years of storefront is never coming back. So now we're going to interject people there. They still have to have something to do, where to eat, because that makes a holistic community. And so my work has been, what are the other things in the community that needs to be there to make it a community that is accessible for the people who live in the housing? That takes money. The Congresswoman said today that the $1 billion, and again, the money is not the problem anymore. There's money every place. The question is, can you get it and can you do something with it? $1 billion is a small business credit initiative, which is the second iteration of an Obama plan. $10 billion were given to governors. California, $1.2 billion, all for small businesses. They've gotten $375 million already. I would assume, raise your hand if you ever heard about it. $375 million. It's a grant to the state, which means the state, if they wanted to, they could turn around and grant it. So the tools are there. We need people who are not afraid to make a mistake, because that's how you learn how to get it right. And I think we've always been told that won't work. You can't do that. And I spent my whole career proving people wrong. So I know it can happen.
I love that. Thank you. Black LA needs us to be innovative and unafraid. You know, I took on the role at LASA, not to defend it, but to make it better, and to make it better for the Black and brown communities that make up the majority of those who are homeless. And I'm encouraged by what I hear. And I want to hear from you, what are you encouraged in seeing right now? What hope do you see in some of the innovations, and some of the policies, and some of the work on the ground? I'm excited about the encampment efforts that are humane, that Mayor Bass and the Board of Supervisors are doing. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but it's being done by people who look like the folks in those encampments, and it is housing driven, it is service driven and service led. And so what we're seeing in the grants pass Supreme Court decision suggests that criminalization is the answer. It is not. And when we tell you that the majority of people who are homeless and overrepresented are Black and brown, we know we must speak up and we must demand that people are served, because we talked today that it was intentional and it was not their fault. That's right. So that's what I'm really excited about in that innovation. I know Mayor Bass will be here later and you'll hear more, and we heard already from the supervisors. But I want to start with you, Dr. Crawford. What's exciting to you that you see in the landscape? What are you proud to see happening?
Yeah. Well, you know, I want to go back to what we've been talking about in the research and the data, because we need data, okay, to get people moving. But what we also, though, have to do is get moving. So I'm glad that everybody, they've researched and everybody's dissected me so they get what I need as a Black person. But now we got to get moving. And so I'm excited for even this type of convening and being able to talk to the community. And my assumption is that we're here because we want to talk about how to get moving. Right? We're in the room. So this isn't the question, but I'm going to throw it in here right quick because I got 3 minutes and I don't think I held that up, right? So this is a policy discussion, and sometimes when I do these things, I leave saying, did we give people in the audience something that they could actually do? So that's what excites me, giving you something that you can actually do. So we got a lot of leaders in the room. How many folks are thinking about hiring bros who have that criminal background, right? Who's being released and really working toward livable wages? Because we talk about building the community. Well, if we're going to do that, we got to make sure we're elevating the people in it. And when we are employers, we got to create an environment that we give folks support so that they don't fall into homelessness. So that's what I'm excited about, to talk plain policy, things that people can actually do, and to lift up the research, which I do think is important. So that's what I'm excited to be here with this crowd.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Chinchilla.
Yeah, I wanted to mention 3 things I'm excited about. So in terms of the homelessness system and where we're moving, I'm really excited about the opportunities around integrating health more closely with homeless services. I think that health is critical. We see a lot of folks that are experiencing homelessness are also have significant health challenges, and we are also now seeing that there's opportunities to be able to leverage some healthcare dollars in how we're serving folks. So I'm really excited about that potential and what that's going to look like in the next couple of years. I'm also really excited about the conversations we're starting to have about targeted universalism, which Dr. Scorza talked about briefly. I think this is, really a recognition that oftentimes the systems that we have weren't built for our communities. So really starting to talk about how do we have, these universal goals around ending homelessness, but how do we look at the specific needs that each community has so that we're really helping them, get out of homelessness or prevent them from falling into homelessness based on what their needs are. And then lastly, I wanted to say that I'm really excited about the potential of coalition work between Black and Brown communities. At the end of 2023, we launched a task force on Latinx homelessness. And one of the first things that the task force did was review the recommendations that had emerged from the ad hoc on Black people experiencing homelessness. And our participants were like, this applies to our community, this applies to our community, as they were looking at the systemic changes that were being recommended under the ad hoc. And so as part of that work, one of the things that we've started to do is to think about, how can we use this opportunity that we have around the Task Force on Latinx Homelessness to uplift some of the systemic challenges that we know are impacting both Black and Brown communities across the board. So I think in terms of the coalition work, there's a lot of excitement for the Latino community being part of the conversation and holding hands with the Black community when it comes to progressive policies around addressing our homelessness and housing issues.
Thank you so much. Mr. Anderson.
Yes. What am I excited about? I guess I'm excited about the fact that Congresswoman Dove helped set up LACASA, which means Los Angeles County Housing Solutions Agency. And I'm excited that Mayor Bass has created the Infrastructure LA team, which Infrastructure LA combines DWP, LA County Public Works to go after federal funding so they can all ask for larger funding. My concern is we often leave money on the table. And that we should be lobbying right now at scale. President Harris wins so that she can continue this executive order. I want to share that I had looked at the infrastructure funding and the climate funding and designed a strategy called Accelerated Housing and Transit Development. And I'll talk about this because what the climate funding, what it does is it looks at converting mom's existing single-family house into a courtyard fourplex. That way she can rent to her kids and grandkids. And what that does is mom would get a $350,000 climate grant. And my purpose is to use climate funding to make amends for redlining, as you were talking about. We've actually talked to about the greenhouse gas funds, of obtaining a larger amount with EPA, of obtaining $35 billion to convert 100,000 houses, basically 4,000 houses within a mile radius of the transit station. And what that looks like is when you add 3 units and make a courtyard living place, mom now lives with her kids and grandkids. But we've now added 4 salaries to that lot. So mom's lot goes from $50,000 income to $300,000. So if you did 4,000, you just added $1 billion in a mile radius of a transit station. That's economic chemistry, because that cash flow is going to improve the quality of grocery stores. Tiffany Haddish would be great because she would open a lot of stores in these communities. But what that does is housing combined with infrastructure. It makes it possible for mom to afford a $1 million remodel. And that $350,000 grant gives her a $650,000 debt service on income property.
That's good.
What happens is when mom passes away, the kids now have a house and income property. They now can pay for a college education.
Thank you.
This is how you start multiplying, making generational wealth. And that's necessary for us to keep our kids from going into the streets. And the purpose of doing this at a larger scale is that every community around Watts, Compton, Willowbrook, Crenshaw, in the Southeast Corridor starts to become a vibrant place. And that's necessary. And so while we have this funding that has to be dispensed by 2026, we should have been asking for the money last year. And so my larger ask is, I'll share some information later, they can find out about it, is let's all unite. As Mitch Landry said, Los Angeles has the opportunity to unite around one project that brings everybody's solutions into one area and make one large-scale federal ask. And so I ask that you all adopt the Accelerated Housing and Transit Development Project so that we can transform our communities at scale and get the money while it's there.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Mills?
What am I excited about? I'm excited that we've got such a wealth of knowledge and opportunity, just even on the panel here.
Thank you.
When you take a look at what he's talking about, infrastructure, if the public dollars were used for infrastructure, housers could build housing. We no longer need to spend a lot of our time and waste in the coordination of different utilities and et cetera. That's taken care of. What I also am excited about is what the other Michael said. Recognizing that housing is only the beginning, we have an economic development component, because what we're trying to do is build vibrant communities.
Correct.
When I talk about developing housing, I'm talking about developing strong families, leaders, 21st century cities. That to me is exciting. But what is most exciting to me is that we are at a crescendo now where there are so many great ideas that something has to bubble up. I've spent the last couple of years frustrated. It is time for me to be excited. And what I love is seeing what is going on in different cities. You've got in different cities where they are mobilizing, the cities, the counties are mobilizing to create that revolving fund so that not only is the infrastructure taken care of, but they have figured out how to cover the cost of construction, which is also the delay in pulling the capital stack together. When you can get 1 or 2 sources of finance to put a project together, you can move that project in less than 2 years. What we traditionally do with affordable housing is we will stack up to 7 to 11 sources of funding, and it just is an exercise in futility. What is exciting is that there are so many models for success going on around the country, and now we can get people into the room and bring that think tank into actionable items. It is time to do it. Not more research for it, not more training about it. Write the check and set us free.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to have you close this out, Mr. Banner. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. So I have a philosophy in life: if you do not ask, you will not get.
Right.
And if you don't ask, the answer's already no, right? So by asking, you're confirming that there's another way to get them to say yes. And the thing that I am typically every day thinking about that excites me, I find there's a wealth of young people who look like us that want things to be different. We're going to have to figure out how to harness that energy. And when you have done what I've done in the financial world for years, rarely I can't think of the times that I had to go and talk to somebody else who looked like me and said, I need $10 million.
Yeah, 4.
Crickets. And we have to change that too, because the apparatuses and the decision making that has been done for the last 40 years has put us in this place where we sit today. Right. If we do not take the time to change that, it's the Einstein moment. Why is anything going to be different if we didn't take a chance and take a risk to make it different? So I encourage everybody that's here and watching to think about how more sophisticated civic and community engagement has gotten over the last decade. We need to keep using that as a tool. And I would say, finally, because I'm a lender and borrow money my whole life, I believe you need to engage, you have to borrow, and then you invest. Yeah. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the panelists. I believe that we have time for a little Q&A, and so I think our